Hello and welcome again to our study. This is coincidence session number 2. So if you didn't have a headache from session number 1 and you stuck around for session 2, welcome. So before we go any farther, let's pray. Father, once again, we're thankful for your word. We're thankful for the intricate details of the word. We're thankful how the puzzle fits together so beautifully crafted. Bless us as we try to understand it and apply it to our lives. We'll give you praise in Jesus' name. Amen. Coincidence session number 2. There were 3 sieges of Israel that King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon laid against Jerusalem. The initial siege was 605 BC. Again in 597 he laid a second siege, and finally he laid his final siege and subsequently destroyed the city of Jerusalem and the temple. This was in 587 BC. The prophet Ezekiel was taken into captivity in the second siege in 597 BC. Ezekiel was taken to a place called Nippur. It's in modern-day Iraq. This was a province of Babylon. And so from Nippur to the Temple Mount, we find something very interesting. As stated previously, the city of Jerusalem was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar and his armies in 587 BC, and from Nippur to the Temple Mount, 587 statute miles exactly. The Babylonian kingdom had enslaved the Jews for some 70 years. And God used a pagan king and kingdom to purge the idolatry from his people. The Babylonians will now fall to another kingdom. They'll fall to the Medes and the Persians. The Medes-Persian Empire, under the leadership of King Cyrus, will now allow the release of God's people. And they will now return to their homeland and their city and rebuild that which had laid in ruin for 7 decades. The precision of the building, the placement, and the nation that affected God's holy mount are now brought into focus. So the precision of the building and the placement and the nations that affected God's holy mount, we now bring that into focus. In all cases, we can see the intricate workings of God as it relates to his people and his holy temple. That is God's real estate. In Daniel chapter 5, we have a very, very interesting passage. And it is one that has been studied many times throughout the centuries. And what can only be described in that passage as a drunken feast, the ruling king of Babylon, his name was Belshazzar, has a banquet for his high ruling dignitaries. Now, during this feast, the hand of God writes a message on the wall in the banquet hall. Now, this message has amazed the scholars for years. The message and its interpretation are pretty clear. God will not let his people be enslaved by any nation longer than his will dictate. Babylon, no exception. God has once again used a pagan nation to purge the Jews of the idolatry that enslaved them. No more would idols of wood or stone be worshipped by the Jews. Never again. The message written on the wall has intrigued scholars for centuries. Now, what was written and the exact language is often debated, but we are clear as to the message God had for the Babylonians. In other words, their time was up. They're now going to fall. God had used a pagan nation once again to purge the nation of the Jews from their idolatry, from the ones that enslaved them. So looking at the passage, Daniel chapter 5 and verse 4, and we do have a study on Daniel 5, and this will go into greater detail if you want to check it out. Daniel 5 and 4, they drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, brass, iron, wood, and stone. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall in the king's palace, and the king saw part of the hand that wrote. Okay, we jump ahead to what the message was. Verse 24, then the part of the hand sent from him, and this was the writing, this is what was written. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. The interpretation of the message was offered by Daniel. He's the only one that could interpret it, and lots of reasons for it. We go into it in another session. Well, this is what it says. This is the interpretation that Daniel gave him. Mene, meaning God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Now, he's talking to the Babylonians now. Tekel, you're weighed in the balances and found wanting. In other words, your kingdom is worthless. And then finally, verse 28, Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. And that's exactly what happened. That night, the Medes and the Persians came underneath the wall, through the moat system, overthrew the Babylonian Empire without so much as even a battle. Belshazzar will die in that siege, and people say that the place of Babylon was destroyed in 539 BC. It was not. The Medes and the Persians will use it for another 200 years, and then Alexander the Great will pick it up, and he will use it when he overthrows the Medes and the Persians. In fact, Alexander will die there. It stayed intact for a long time. It fell apart throughout the centuries, but right now it is being rebuilt. Babylon was never destroyed, not the way God says it will be. So it's interesting if you read Isaiah chapter 13 and 14, Jeremiah 50 and 51, and Revelation 17 and 18. They're all talking about the same thing. Read it all at one sitting and you'll see Babylon will fall. It'll come to nothing but dust, but it hasn't yet. Peres, Upharsin. This is basically the plural form of Peres, so there's really no issue there as far as the text goes. It's significant that this event occurred in 539 BC. It is this remarkable date and time that God used as a catalyst to show his purpose. Now consider what the hand wrote. And that's what they say it looked like. And this is what it means. Interpreted by rabbinic scholars, this was to be read from the top to the bottom like normal, but moving from the right to the left, which is what Hebrew does. These words at that time had monetary values. That's interesting. These values are also used as standards of weights for use in Ezekiel's future temple. The numeric number associated with the message is 2,520. Now the Magi, or the wise men, if you will, who were initially called upon to decipher the message, they were unable to understand it. Amazingly, we are indebted to, Sir Isaac Newton for his understanding of this incredible message. There are the Hebrew letters if you want to trace this out. Let's continue. Numbers, as God sees them, are significant in his plan and will. The number 7 is also of significance, as we see in John's book of Revelation. The persistence of this number cannot be ignored. In the Greek, the number 7 is called heptad. It's a heptadic structure. It means 7. There are, according to researchers, over 200 heptadic structures in the book of Revelation alone. Very interesting. Considering what we've already discussed and allowing for the number 7 to be utilized, see another interesting parallel. The writing on the wall in Daniel chapter 5 and its significant meaning numerically, the words is 2,520. It should come as no surprise that the number 17,640 also equates to the number of days between the destruction of Jerusalem in 587 and the fall of Babylon by the Medes and the Persians. You see, when you look at the biblical years, all biblical years are 12 months of 30 days each. So a biblical year for the Jew is 360 days, not 365 as we show it. Let's continue. Oh, incidentally, Jerusalem also sits 2,520 feet above sea level. Is that a coincidence? Let's continue. Well, the apocryphal book of Maccabees, chapter 2 and verse 4, records that Jeremiah hid the Ark of the Covenant prior to the destruction of Jerusalem in 587 BC. He took it out before Jerusalem was to be completely destroyed. And according to the text, the Ark was hidden in a cave. According to other legendary accounts, it was on Mount Nebo in modern-day Jordan. So there's a picture of Mount Nebo, and there's the Temple Mount. And yeah, it's exactly 25.20 nautical miles from Nebo to Jerusalem. Coincidence? Eschatological study, that's a fancy word for prophecy. So, prophecy study from the book of Daniel offers us significant proof that the temple of the Jewish people will be built at a future date. The question is always considered is exactly where the temple will be constructed. Any and all attempts to build a temple of any significance would be met with unbelievable violence, assured violence by the Islamic nations, as they are in control of the Temple Mount proper. How that will happen, who will give the word, understand it's coming. It will be there. As we're all aware, God allows for little question as His word dictates all details regarding the temple. Any attempt to build a temple in the wrong place would prompt God to act accordingly. Now, today, the rabbis are at odds as to exact location of the old temple. Islamic governance will not allow for the Jews to evacuate or excavate or anything on the mount, any way, shape, or form. They are governed the number of people that will come to the mount, what they will do, how they act. They cannot show any emotion. They cannot pray. They evacuate exactly as they're told, and they can excavate nothing. Well, many Jewish researchers concluded the Temple Mount must be built starting on the foundation stone. Well, where is that? Well, the whereabouts of this stone may very well be in plain sight, but quite inaccessible for use in that construction. The Islamic people have done all they can to make construction almost impossible. There exists a place the stone can be laid, or it may be laid. However, now right there we have the Dome of Tablets or the Dome of Jinn. It's an Islamic building, small little building that sits atop where the foundation stone sits. It is the only place in the Temple Mount that is not overlaid with stones. In other words, it's there. They know it's there and they built that. And even the Muslims themselves cannot give you an exact reason for the purpose of the Dome of Tablets. They have no idea. They have differing opinions why it's there, but understand, again, they own the Temple Mount. They rule the Temple Mount with an iron fist. Remember, the Jews have to leave the Temple Mount in a specific way or action. They evacuate in a certain way, and they cannot do any altering of the Temple Mount proper at all. So from the Dome of Tablets and direct line, the eastern gate at Mount Nebo, where the ark was supposedly placed by Jeremiah, Mount Nebo, 25.20 nautical miles from the Temple Mount to Mount Nebo. Exactly. Well, the significance of Rome cannot be dismissed. Rome had, in the day of the Bible, a stranglehold on the land of Israel. It should be noted that the end time scenario will also have Rome at the end of fierce world dominance, as she is seen as a power the Antichrist will use for his advantage. The distance between the temple and Rome is not without significance. And we're reminded that the days of the Antichrist reign will be 7 years or 7 years of 360 days, which totals, as you might guess, 2,520 days. Additionally, the Antichrist will come from within the revived Roman Empire. Well, keeping with the number 2520, it's no accident that Rome sits exactly 2,520,000 yards from the Temple Mount. 666. It's a number that everybody hates, but it's still there. Well, just the mention of the number and its visual appearance of it is cause for many to shudder at its significance. It should be noted that there are more references to it in the Bible other than Revelation 13. So quickly, let's look at Revelation chapter 13. Here is wisdom. Let him that has understanding count the number of the beast, for the number of a man, his number is 666. And it has to do with money, forcing people to take a mark on their hand or on their head so that they can buy or sell. If you don't have the mark, you don't buy, you don't sell. Understand, you take that mark, you've damned your soul. Revelation 14 is very clear. You take the mark, you're pledging allegiance to the Antichrist, and you are damning your soul. Well, we find in 1 Kings chapter 10 and verse 14, now the weight of gold that came to Solomon, he was the king of Israel, in 1 year was 666 talents. So in other words, he also 666 talents of gold. And that's interesting because both references are directly linked to wealth or money. Money and other pleasures were the downfall of Solomon, as will be the cause for the downfall of the evil end time world leader, which is the Antichrist. 666. I'll wait just a little bit more. As a side note, although biblical weights and measurements can be ambiguous as far as their value, the gold sent to Solomon was valued at some $20 to $40 million per year. Interesting. Well, the enemies of Israel, and that being the Islamic nations, have their most holy place in Saudi Arabia. Well, the Kaaba stone, which they honor and worship, is located in Mecca. Well, there's Mecca, and there's the Dome of the Rock, and from there to there is, 666 nautical miles. Coincidence? Don't think so. See, the Bible mentions in the book of Esther and Nehemiah the place called Susa as being significant. Both Daniel and Nehemiah have lived in the province of Babylon. It is from this place that Daniel wrote his prophecies relating to world kingdoms as they dominate the world in the end time scenario. The exact location of Daniel as he wrote his prophecy is between the banks of the Ulai River. We find that in Daniel chapter 8. Interestingly enough, the Ulai River splits and runs east and west of Susa. Daniel, being in the middle of both the tributaries, is now a significant position most commentators miss. Susa is exactly 666 nautical miles from the Temple Mount. Now, we are given the location of the Garden of Eden in Genesis. The Bible states that it had rivers or tributaries. Now, we can decipher the location, but the significance is not just the distance from the Temple Mount, but the events that happened and the evil one that brought humanity to a sinful state. It is the angel Lucifer that caused man and woman to sin and forever prompt God to act as he did. However, another reality arises. The end time scenario has the Antichrist dwelling in Jerusalem. The devil will use this man to unleash untold horrors on all mankind. Eden was originally a garden for God's creation to dwell in, but the travesty that ensued from there will cause men to worship a man the devil has empowered to do his bidding. Sad as it is, the place of the Garden of Eden is exactly 666 nautical miles from the Temple Mount. Ark of the Covenant. Well, that's interesting. The Ark of the Covenant is actually just a box, and the top of the box where the wings are, that is the mercy seat. So it's kind of two parts there, if you will. It's a sacred wood chest that was covered by gold, a solid gold top, which itself was entitled the mercy seat. Atop the ark were grafted two gold eagles whose wings stretched toward each other. Within the ark were placed the law of God, a pot containing manna, and Aaron's rod, which had budded. From this ark and between the two cherubims, the very presence of God spoke and abode. It's crafted according to God's directions, 1.5 by 1.5 by 2.5 cubits. Now, these dimensions were according to the Egyptian cubit. There are many different cubits. This cubit was 25.20 inches. Again, we see 2520. The same as the value of the letters and writing on the wall in Daniel chapter 5, 25, 20. Exodus 25:20. And the cherubim shall stretch forth their wings on high, covering the mercy seat with their wings, and their faces look toward one another. Toward the mercy seat shall be the faces of the cherubim be. 25:20. All that coincidence? Could it be just by happenstance? Well, understand, the more I read this book, the more I understood that nothing is by happenstance. God is a God of detail, and the precision of the word is something that once you get in your spirit, you can't walk away from it. I hope this study has been informative to you. I hope you had a good time. I hope your headache wasn't too bad. And we'll see you on the next study. Be safe, be blessed. Remember, God's got all the details. He's got them all written down. They're in that book. Yeah, read the book. We'll see you on the other studies.